Welcome to the Thrive Today podcast. I'm Natalie Born, the media host for Thrive Today and the founder of Innovation Meets Leadership. Well, guess what? We have a treat for you today. We're a platform for women who lead and believe, and we are sitting down with Dr. Sam Chan. Dr. Sam Chan is a leadership consultant, and he serves leaders all around the world, and he focuses on personal as well as organizational growth and change. He has written over 23 books, and what I'm excited about today is we are going to talk about his brand new book called Voices. He's also the publisher of the AVAIL Leadership Journal, which I write in quarterly on behalf of Thrive Today. So if you haven't seen that, if you haven't gotten to pick that up, please do. And one of the things you need to know about Dr. Chan, or the last thing you need to know, is that he has been listed as one of the top 30 global leadership gurus. So excited to have you on the podcast today, Dr. Sam.
What an honor and joy to be with you again, Natalie. You're doing such a great work, reaching ladies who have something on them. And I know your vision and the founder, Colleen Rouse, her vision is to call it out of people. That's something, we all have something on us. And it usually takes somebody outside of us to call it out of us, to affirm that, to name it even. And somebody did that with you, somebody did that with me. Thank you for everything that you do. And as I was thinking about this call today, Natalie, I got to thinking that you are speaking to so many people's lives. And on behalf of all of those, I'm not a lady, but on behalf of all of those ladies, my blessed with ladies, my mother was one, my wife is one, my children are that, my grandchildren, they're all ladies, all of them. Thank you for speaking life into them.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. And, I am so blessed because I got the opportunity to get my hands on an early copy of a book that you're releasing called Voices. And my husband and I got to read a little bit of it together. And it's called The Voices, the Power, Pain, and Purpose of Voices in Our Lives. And I want to start out and just ask, because this is such a powerful book, it's powerful content. Every single person listening to this needs to get this book, but I want to go back a little bit of ways and ask you, what inspired you to sit down and put this work into a book?
Thank you, Natalie. I'm very excited about this. Every year here in January, we do VIP leaders gathering, ministry and marketplace outside the country. And we've been doing for 7 years now. We've been to Colombia, Panama, Puerto Rico, etc., etc. And this year we were in Aruba. Next year, 2025 January, we'll be in Bermuda. Yeah, and we have room only for 50 leaders, so they're all high-level leaders. And when I start prepare for that at least 6 to 8 months out, and I keep preparing, because what I want to do at that meeting is to present a thought, not a topic, but a thought. Because the Bible says, as a man thinks, so is he. As a woman thinks, so is she. And so the thought this year in Aruba was voices. And after I got through teaching it, I had no book in my mind. I was just teaching, because like 2.5 days of the 6-star event, the best of everything is there. And people kept coming up to me, hey, that's a book. You need to write that book. I never thought about that book because I wasn't planning on working that hard. It's it's one thing to prepare a teaching, and writing a book is not just transcribing that. You and I've read books, Natalie, in which somebody just took a series of teachings and just transcribed it, and it doesn't feel like somebody is writing it. And I didn't want to work that hard, but pressure was so high that I said, okay, let's write this book. And here we are. The book comes out next month, and I'm just really excited about it. So that's the genesis behind this book called Voices.
So what I loved about just kind of getting an early hands on reading some of this is that you pose many powerful questions. You put many powerful statements in there, and having the chance to get to go to one of your leader gatherings in the past, I always feel like I leave with these just big, powerful thoughts on my mind. And so, one of the powerful questions you asked is, how does your voice impact the people you lead? And I'd love to just spend a moment unpacking that.
Yeah. So every book that I write or every teaching that I do, Natalie, for many years now, I build it around a sentence. So my book Leadership Pain has a sentence attached to it. My book Bigger Faster Leadership has a sentence attached to it. My book What's Shaking a Ladder has a sentence. Every book that I've written, this will be my 30th book.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a labor of love for sure. And so I build every book around a sentence. In this book, I have two sentences. And if I could give you those sentences, that'll answer your question and we can unpack it further. Sentence number one: the voice in your head becomes the voice in your mouth. Sentence number two: and the voice in your mouth becomes the voice in somebody else's head. Let me give that again. The two sentences are: sentence number one, the voice in my head becomes the voice in my mouth. And the voice in my mouth becomes the voice in somebody else's. I want to submit to you and to your listeners, watchers on Thrive Today, is that all of us are a sum total of voices into our life. Could have been a parent, could have been a teacher, could have been a pastor, could have been a work associate, could be a boss, could have been a client. But when I look at you, Natalie, you do so many things. You are a business entrepreneur yourself. You lead entrepreneurs. You have your own media outlets. You're doing a lot. So how did you get here? How did I get here? Somebody spoke that into us.
Yes.
Somebody called that. That's what Thrive Today does. That's why I'm so
Mhm.
excited about Colleen, you, and the team. Is you call it out. You, for example, your name, Thrive Today, and what a great verbiage that is in the midst of when our circumstances of life keep telling us how bad things are, and how you can't do this, and how you're not equipped for that. And you're saying to ladies, you can thrive.
Mhm.
And you don't have to wait to thrive. You can thrive today.
That's right. That's
Voices.
right.
Those are the things that become so important in our life. So since you and I, Natalie, and everybody listening to us really are a product of voices, for good or bad, we are a product of voices spoken to our life. That is why it's so important to understand that the voices in our head become the voice in our mouth, and the voice in our mouth becomes the voice in somebody else's head. We can unpack that further, but I don't want to get into a monologue here.
No, this is great. I think this is so powerful. And so I think what we're going to do today is tease just enough of the book for you to realize and know that you need to go right away and get it. And, as we move towards chapter 2, it got even more powerful for me personally, because in chapter 2, you start to talk about the voices we've ignored. And I'd love to spend just a few minutes on that.
Yeah. So I think about my life. I can't talk about your life, Natalie, or anybody else listening to me. The voices I have ignored are voices that told me I could. Voices that I paid more attention to are voices that told me I couldn't.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Years ago, Natalie, there was a book written. We're talking about maybe 30 years ago. There's a book written on the whole topic of transactional analysis, a discipline of counseling, in which the title of the book was "I'm okay, you're okay." But I have concluded I'm not okay, and neither are you.
That's right.
That's that dysfunctional aspect of our life
Yeah.
that gravitates towards negativity.
Yes.
We remember negative voices than we remember positive voices. Natalie, 10 people can stand in line and tell you how amazing you are. But the 11th person tells you you're not all that. And guess who you're going to think about all day long? And the next day, and the next day, and the next day is that one person.
Right.
And that's the dysfunctional part of us, is we ignore the voices we need to pay attention to, and we gravitate towards and even embrace voices that we should ignore. And I think discerning that makes all the difference in the world.
Wow. This is powerful because, I think you're right when oftentimes I may ask people, tell me about, some of the key leaders that shaped your world. Sitting across from a lady just recently, and she said it was the person that told me I couldn't do my job, right? To your point, it wasn't the 10 that told me I could, it was the one person that said I couldn't. And so I wonder what it is in our brains that want to fixate on the negative, especially when we don't renew our mind. I think we have more of a ability to go towards those negative voices and remember those above the positive ones.
I think, Natalie, we have to make choices. First of all, I hope that through this conversation here, we sensitize people how important voices are. Because you're going to hear 1,000 voices through different ways, but you're going to hear about 10, 15 that really affect you personally. And these voices, unless you have discernment about it, unless you can say to yourself, I can choose my voices. Just because somebody tells me I'm not all that, I don't have to believe them. I remember when Brenda and I were getting married, it was the 70s, it was Atlanta, it was racial unrest at a high level. And we went to our pastor to ask him to marry us. So Brenda's white and I'm not. And our pastor said to us, I won't marry you.
Mm,
And I asked him why, and Brenda was there. I asked him why, and he said, because I don't think your marriage will work. Interracial marriages don't work. Okay. I'm not faulting, I'm not throwing him under the bus. I'm saying something. It's the voice in his mouth were the voice in his head, and where those voices came from him. So the voices in his mouth became the voice in my head. So Brenda and I have been married now for 45 years. And I want to tell you, Natalie, his negative voice has been a great motivation for us to stay married through difficult times.
yeah.
Because every marriage has difficult times. I don't care what they
Mhm.
say from the platform. Every marriage has difficult times. So we had to discern how do we take this negative voice and repurpose it for positivity. And I think that's what I want hearers, listeners today to get from our conversation is you
Mhm.
have a choice. You can repurpose those negative voices and really do something with your life.
Well, let me just say, I'm so grateful that you guys didn't listen because you have a fantastic family and I just love your daughters. So I'm grateful that you move forward with the call that God had on the life for the two of you because I can't imagine your impact without Brenda and without your children. So I just have to pause and say that. But secondarily, I just want to say that what's beautiful about what you just said is that is exactly what jujitsu is, right? Using the weight of your opponent to catapult you into your next move and to really understand that the resistance that they're putting on you can actually spur you in a positive direction. And I love that.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about this powerful thought you mentioned in your book around confidence is a valuable leadership trait if coupled with humility, but it's deadly when it's coupled with arrogance that blinds us. So I love us as leaders grappling with this thought. It's a pretty powerful one.
You know my work, Natalie, for close to 40 years. I have worked with leaders. I work with leaders. And while I got to do a lot of platform speaking all over the world, and I told you this is my 30th book, I get all of that. But my real work has been with leaders one on one all over the world. So I've got leadership clients on 5 of the 6 continents. And I have concluded that the potential and the propensity for any leader to become arrogant is right there for all kinds of different reasons. Let me give a few of those. One is we start believing our own press.
Mhm,
We really start believing we're all that in a bag of chips. And then people tell us how wonderful we are,
mhm,
and we start believing that. And then people start handling us the way they arrange for our travel, the hotels that they put us up in, the restaurants that they host us in. the introductions that they give us, the videos that are out there made by professionals before you speak, the venues you get to speak at, the thousands of people there, the kind of invitations you start getting. I mean, to tell you, there is that sinful side of our lives that is in the process of being sanctified, but we struggle with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can throw myself under the bus as to how I have not handled some of those things right, in which I start getting the sense of entitlement.
Yeah.
Like, don't they know? How could they? Shouldn't they have? And that arrogance is right there on the doorstep. In fact, pride
Yeah.
is the number one reason for leadership failure. Pride is the number one. So let's talk about pride for a minute. Pride, the sin of pride, did not originate on this planet.
Right.
The sin of pride originated in heaven. Think about that. That's how strong pride is. It did not originate on planet Earth after the creation in Genesis. It preceded that. So pride is, and excuse my next verbiage, pride is a heavenly sin.
Mm-hmm.
It was, and it has that sin in heaven cast Lucifer out of heaven along with his rebellious angels, and it is still the strongest sin. It is the most seductive sin, and can I use another word? It's the most addictive sin.
Mm.
And so when we see leaders fail, leaders fall, whatever the circumstances might be, the genesis of that is pride. So everybody listening to me, I just want you to know the enemy is after you, and he's going to reach you in the most susceptible, seductive, and addictive area of your life. And that is why it is so important that the voices in our head don't become that voice of entitlement and pride and arrogance. And I deserve this.
Mm.
So I can tell you this about, as an immigrant, I don't. I'm just glad to be alive. You just need to know how honored I am just to be in this call,
Yeah.
because I fight entitlement, I fight arrogance, I fight pride.
Wow. This is so powerful. And I think that, going back to what you said, I think, when we started this call and we think about the voices in our head and we think about how do they get there? What are you feeding into your mind? What are you feeding into your thoughts? Who are you surrounding yourself with? I think this becomes a very important thing. And as you get older, the more you see that the relationships you surround yourself with make or break your life. I mean, I've seen it time and time again now. A relationship that someone brought into their life burns their life to the ground. And so this is such an important part when we think about the longevity of a leader, is understanding and knowing who's in your ear, who are the voices that are speaking into your life. And so I want to kind of shift into a section in your book where you talk about the voice of toxic messages. And again, another powerful statement here. The problem is that we give toxic messages far too much space in our heads. I want to take a moment to talk about that because, again, what we are feeding into ourselves every day, it matters and it makes a difference.
Let's define what makes a voice toxic. What makes a voice toxic is any voice that keeps you from what God has placed in your life.
Mm.
Mothers, for example, wrestle with, I'm not the best mother. Wives wrestle with, if I could just be like her, kind of thing. Those toxic voices will make room for themselves in your head. So anything that keeps you from moving forward, anything that keeps you from uh, reminding yourself and believing that you are an image bearer, you are created in God's image, that you're amazing. Scriptures call it, in the King James version says, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And so you got to fight those toxic voices. Now, I can tell you this, that I have learned more about myself from toxic voices than from affirming voices.
Wow.
Because affirming voices just tell me I'm wonderful. Toxic voices say, ah, nah, whatever, that kind of a thing. Yeah. So then if I'm healthy, I can take the toxic voice and treat it like eating chicken.
Mm,
I'll eat the meat and throw away the bones.
that's good.
And I won't tell you, but you can only do that if you're in a healthy place in your life.
That's right.
If you can only do that if you're in a secure place in your life. You can only do that if you say, people who have said that to me in a toxic kind of a way may have meant it for harm, or may have meant it like constructive criticism. I can tell you, Natalie, I've never received constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is only constructive in the mouth of that person. I
Mhm.
just have to take it as criticism. Then I have to decide, is this constructive? Is it destructive? Or it is instructive? So for me, I don't see it as destructive. I don't see it as constructive. I see it as instructive. That means it teaches me something. And I think if you are healthy enough, you can do self inventory
Mhm.
and say, I'll look out for that. I'll watch for that. So yeah, I think we make room for toxic voices, but toxic voices are not always unhelpful, even though they find their place in our life.
Wow. Well, what I love about what you said, and this is something that a mentor told me many years ago, is that all feedback must be weighed and not all feedback weighs the same. So,
Yeah.
someone that's known you for 5 minutes, that shouldn't weigh the same as someone who's known you for 15 years. And I love that we're grappling with this idea of weighing it and considering it, even if it doesn't come from a source that you necessarily enjoy how it was delivered and what was delivered, still asking the question, how do I weigh this and get the benefit out of this feedback, even if I don't like how it was delivered? So I want to switch gears in the last segment and just talk a little bit about this last phrase that I think is really important. And then from there, people are just going to have to get the book because we're not going to give away all the secrets. But there's this section in the book where you say it's not loving to let people keep hurting others. The loving thing is to stop them. Let's talk more about that because I think that especially, and let's kind of pivot into church world for a second. I think in and I've lived in both worlds, in church world and in business world. And in business world, typically if someone says something that is hurtful or inappropriate, whether it's in the moment or even pulling them aside, regardless of their level on the org chart, I've found it pretty easy to pull someone aside and say, "Hey, let's talk about that interaction. Let's walk through that." Sometimes in church world, because of ranking and hierarchy and those things, that doesn't necessarily fly, but let's like maybe even look at those different environments and see how can we have these maybe pivotal or hard conversations if someone is creating a pattern in their life and that needs to be addressed.
Now that is a huge topic. That's a topic of its own. But let me just kind of put my toes into that topic. It is imperative for people who love people to not be the defenders, but also be aware that we can mitigate some of that meanness, some of those things that people say and they say, oh, just kidding.
Mm,
No, you weren't just kidding.
right.
Under the guise of, oh, just kidding, but you've already said it. And you say a lot of stuff that you just kidding. You say a lot of that. I mean, so I see a pattern there under the just kidding kind of a thing. Or you then in church, a lot of people don't have the courage themselves to say it. So they will say, other people are saying,
Mm,
or as I was praying, or the Lord put you on my heart. And they will say mean stuff after that
yep.
and not have filter behind that. So I think the loving thing to do is to not let people get away with that. Because in church, people feel like they can say anything they want to whoever they want to, but they don't want to take instruction themselves.
Right.
So I can tell you what I have done. First of all, I recognize that people live lives by patterns.
Mm.
So whatever people are doing in church, they're also doing at workplace in a different way. They're doing it in their home a different way. They're doing that in their neighborhoods in a different way, but they're still the pattern remains. So if people are uncool or insensitive or feel like they have entered into everybody else's life, they live that life by patterns,
Yeah.
and they continue those patterns because nobody is calling them out on that pattern.
Mhm.
So what I have found helpful is to say something like, "Hey Natalie, can we talk?" And say to them, "Hey, I've noticed a pattern." Because if you talk about one incident, they
Right.
will always defend that incident. So if
That's
you
right.
talk about incidents, you're going to get reasons, excuses
Mhm.
for what they do. They will always have a reason for that, and then you end up talk going nowhere with that conversation. And you say to them, "I have noticed a pattern," and they will say things like, "Give me an example." Well, instead of giving you an example, let me just tell you the pattern I've seen. And you don't have to agree with me, don't have to disagree with me, but let me just tell you the pattern I've seen. The pattern I've seen is you throw a sword into somebody's heart, and then you say, "Just kidding."
Mm.
And I've seen that pattern in your life.
Mm.
So I just wanted to just kind of point it out to you. You don't have to agree with me, Natalie. You don't have to disagree with me. But that's a pattern I have noticed. And just take it for whatever it's worth. And just leave it at that. Now, if you want to go beyond that, in which you say, in this conversation, Natalie is going to. I'm sorry to keep using for example here, Natalie, but if my outcome in my head, in my voice in my head is that Natalie will agree with me, number one, Natalie will repent from it, number two, and
Mhm.
Natalie will never do that again, number three, and Natalie will effusively thank me for my forthrightness in life. That is a conversation about the voices I'm hearing in my head.
Yes.
But if I can just bring it to Natalie, tell her, take it, leave it, agree, disagree, put trash it, put it away. I just want to share that with you, Natalie, because I love you. I can then have that conversation.
Wow.
So stay away from incidents to prove your point. Just stay with the pattern and do not hear a voice in your head like, "Hey, Natalie should agree with me. Natalie should agree with me. Natalie should repent. Natalie should stop doing this." Those are different voices altogether. Those are what are called demanding voices. You
Mm.
can never help somebody with a demanding voice coming out of your mouth.
Wow. That's a very powerful thought that you just said right there. As we close this segment, I would love to know what final thoughts you have for the listeners today, because we've covered some incredible ground. This last piece that of advice that you gave us, I think levels up how we communicate with others, which we all could level that up. I mean, I think that's an area that we're in our entire life figuring out, how do we better communicate, how do we communicate more clearly with others.
So, Natalie, one of the things that's emerged to me after the book was written, after most of my best thoughts comes after the books are written.
Mhm.
So like, I should have written that, I should have changed that kind of thing. The voices in my head, uh, is that this is a book that is good for mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, teachers, preachers, CEOs, managers. It is for everybody to realize that the voice in my head becomes the voice in my mouth, and the voice in my mouth becomes the voice of somebody else's head. And I would say to everybody who is listening to us today, be cognizant of the voices in your life. You got to know which voices you need to hear. You need to know what voices you got to stop hearing or don't need
Mhm.
to hear. And you need to know the voices you need to change. And so I'm really excited about this book. The way we are doing this is right now we're not selling it. We are saying whatever you want to pay for the book.
Mm, wow.
And yeah, it's we would just want the voices to be out there. So it's not like $20 and postage and handling that. We're just saying whatever you want to pay. You want to pay $0, just put $0 in there. You want to pay $50 for those who put zero, make up for them. Let's do that.
Mhm.
And the website for that is very simple: voicesbookoffer.com. And when you go there, you get the book free or whatever you want to pay for it. And then if you want to get the study guide, you can get that. The audio book, you can get that. The master class, you can get that. I can envision this master class being part of small groups. I see this master class
Mhm.
being part of staff development. I can see so many different. So this is not just a leadership book. This is my first book that I would say it has leadership components to it because that's who I am. So it bleeds into everything. That's a pattern of my life. But this is my first book that is really written for people who are alive today, uh,
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
in life. So just go to voicesbookoffer.com and it'll walk you through it.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I will say that as my husband and I were delving into the book, we felt the same way. We felt like this is a book that everyone should have in their hands. It should be something you're gifting very often. It should be something you're talking about, whether it's a small group setting or a book study or however you want to bring people together. We felt the same thing when we read this book. And so we hope that you will not delay, that you will go ahead and go to that link, voicesbookoffer.com, and get this material. Dr. Sam Chan, thank you so much for your time today.
Nah, thank you, Natalie, for everything that you do. You talk to so many people. You know something, what you do is you pull our voices out and put them out there. Thank you for everything that you do. Colleen Rouse, Thrive Today. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining the Thrive Today podcast. Be sure to follow, share, subscribe on all your social media channels and tell other women about this podcast. Now, you can follow Dr. Sam Chan at Sam Chan on Twitter. Go over to LinkedIn, that's Sam Chan, and then Sam Chan Leadership on Instagram. And then head over to samchan.com for his website. Look, if you haven't had a chance to step into community, let me ask you a question. What are you waiting for? Get into a group of like minded women over at thrivetoday.com. Head over there, sign up to receive coaching plus monthly resources at your fingertips. Well, ladies, as you live your life, we want you to do it with leadership, community, and strength. And don't forget to thrive. We'll see you next time.